emergence, but a highly politicized historical one. So they'll be offering some critiques as well as some reflections regarding the factors, the causes, and things like that as they relate to curriculum. The second part of my conversation, let's call it that. The second part then of my conversation would be me beginning to propose, and that's me deliberately provoking some of you by drawing on a dead white man and another living white man. They are theoretical tools that I think they give us to begin to think about what transformation looks like. And this will be the epistemic pedagogical device. I'll be explaining it what it is, and I think why it's useful for us within transformation and decolonization. And then I think the last part, I will dedicate the latter part of my conversation towards proposing some sort of theoretical and philosophical solutions to the crisis, right? This is where I'll be referring on what we can do regarding decolonizing or even transforming curriculum, or at the bare minimum, must call it troubling, like he was proposing, right? At the minimum, troubling curriculum and what that can possibly look like. We have to go back to context, colleagues, right? The emergence of the 2015-2016, and I think Mascole is very, very right, it's not a new phenomenon in South African higher education. Often what you see in the literature is the representation of student movement as only occurring in 2015-2016. Of course, that's historically false. We know from the SASWA and the new SAS that as early as the 1960s and early 70s, there have always been the existence of student movement in South African higher education. And we also know that student protest and organization, including mobilization, was also documented as early as the early 1990s, like your 92, your 93. Here I'm referring to University of the Western Cape, 40 universities and others. They've always been trapped in a protracted struggle. Of course, it was not on the basis of institutional culture, curricula and those things like that, but it was on the basis of fees, accommodation, the periphery road that some of these universities were located at. So it's not a new phenomenon, right? However, what makes the 2015-2016 moment very new to us is that these debates at least began to be articulated by students in arguing and calling for decolonization, Africanization, transformation, and things like that. The reason I'm placing it precisely like that is to begin to problematize and to trouble the understanding, right? I'm trying to point to you, and our colleagues who are attending the talk week will begin to understand this, the institutional fragmentation and inequality within the higher education system. And what I mean by that was that there is a critique, and I think it's a fair one, colleagues, that says that because this university, together with UC and the Witwatersrand, started to protest, then therefore their views of the student began to matter. The media discourse and the public discourse began to pay attention to them. However, if you look at the Fortarians and those at UWC and the others who've been protesting, including UKZN, where the burning did not start in 2015, in 2006, 2007, there were already protracted protest action. So my talk already begins by commenting on the inequality within the public discourse when it comes to higher education institutions. And of course, the power that historically white universities still occupy, not only in having access to this public discourse, but in also shaping the media attention, has been very, very important. So when we speak about 2015, 2016, yes, it's significant in terms of raising the issues of the intersectionality between curriculum, blackness, to produce new forms of marginality. Gender was also one of the issues that came up as well. Institutional culture, now they are alienated. The issues of spatial justice, now my university does not feel like I belong, and those are the concerns, all of that. But the emergence of the student movement is not a new phenomenon. And also my argument is, colleagues, to you, and we can have this conversation afterwards, is that what is particularly new, at least with the 2015-2016, is it begins to offer us an opportunity, particularly those in education, to begin to critique the Tylerian conception of curriculum construction, right? Where it's about content, assessment, objectives, outcomes, and things like that. That's not enough. And we also need to move beyond curriculum conceptions in the Pinar sense, where William Pinar simply defines, and at least this is dominant within those in the School of Education, begins to define curricula as content. And if you follow Basil Bernstein, then curriculum is only valid knowledge. But I argue that curriculum is everything. Curriculum can also be phenomenological. Curriculum can also be experience. And for me, that's the opportunity that the 2015-2016 movement gave us. And that's the one, colleagues, that I'm arguing. That's how we should be looking at a curriculum. Not just specifically in terms of the specific text, curriculum written down, documents, assessment, teaching and learning and those other things, but also the walking into campus and experiences and everything like that. I'm sorry, that too constitutes a curriculum. And I would implore you that we begin to see it like that. Even though I've said that, even though based on everything that I've said, I'm still asking, and this is the question I can pose back to you. Can curricula therefore be the panacea for all the ills of South African higher education? And if you follow Andre Keat, as early as late 2018, when we were at the University of Connecticut, he seems to believe that is the solution, right? And his argument is very, very simple. Transform curricula, then your demographics and institutional culture will change. Really? I'm not convinced. So I think we're beginning to see an emergence of a conception, at least in South African higher education, that looks at curricula as a solution to everything. Right? It's going to sort institutional culture. It's going to sort gender-based violence, right? It's going to sort the housing crisis, right? It's going to sort the issues of alienation and things like that. It's going to sort all of that. Is that the space for curriculum? Or do we not need to fashion a much more complex and sophisticated understanding of higher education solutions? Not just in curricula, that's a part of it. But there's other instances. Hence, we need a much more broader intersectional perspective when it comes to these challenges. Having outlined all my brief background, I now begin to draw on this dead white man and a living one to begin to not only provoke you, but to see these struggles that are happening in South African higher education transformation, specifically as they relate to curriculum. And the conceptual framework that I'm hoping to rely on is the one that was constructed by Bernstein and modified by Carl Mayton, right? One is dead, one is still alive. And so they begin to propose the epistemic pedagogical device, right? Now, what's exciting for me in particular, working in higher education, seeing some of the challenges that are happening in curricula and the different struggles, is to begin to see, right? He proposes that we can conceptualize how knowledge and knowers are legitimated, right? And he creates three arenas, right? Three fields. The first one is the field of production, right? That's when new knowledge is produced. So your academic conference, your books, your conference proceedings, things like that, right? That would be the field of production, where new knowledge is produced. The second field is the field of recontextualizing. This is exciting for me, not only for my own PhD, but also how under-researched it is, because it's in the field of recontextualization where it's largely under-theorized. Here we begin to see simply you being in your office designing your own course content. You are designing your course outline, like Sally was telling us, right? And deciding that I want Hobbes, I don't want Mamdani. I want Mbembe, I don't want Sartre. I want Heidegger, I don't want Habermas. I want Jean-Paul Sartre, all those curricular decisions. And the argument, and I agree with it, the argument is those are not neutral, innocent decisions. They are deeply political, and they are deeply contested. What influences those decisions? And I think Sally is already beginning to trouble those assumptions. And the third arena that both Mayton and Bernstein provide for us is the field of reproduction, right? So the first one is the field of production where we produce new knowledge. The second one is the recontextualizing, you sitting down and selecting from the field of production, these are my readings, these are my course, that's what I want, that's not what I want, and things like that. Then of course the field of reproduction is your teaching and learning arena. Your seminar room discussions, classroom discussions, assessment practices and things like that. Those pedagogical relations that we often have. And the power structures and the struggles that get to occur. So for me, therefore, I begin to look exactly at the transformation of curricula and the debates regarding it through those three arenas, right? So of course, when you look at the field of production, that's where issues like Africanization, decoloniality, decolonization are happening. And even within those kinds of discourses, we still, colleagues, need to theorize because we are still not particularly clear around the distinction, at least conceptually, the differences between decoloniality and decolonization. And if you push the debate further enough, your Joel Mudire, Tsepo Mahingozi, particularly the cohort from the University of Pretoria and UNISA, they will even be telling you, but by forcefully drawing on the theoretical tools from Latin America, that already is new colonization. So our ethical responsibilities as South African scholar is to begin to create a new theoretical language that responds to our own context and reality. And those are the kind of debates. That simplistic essentialization of what it means to be African. And even in my own thesis, I push back against that level of particularization that seeks to suggest that knowledge can never be transnational. Knowledge must always be local and things like that. And also, what does that mean for cumulative knowledge building, right? And part of the struggles, right, we saw as early as, I think, with 2013, 2014, when Ntolela Mango was commenting on Biko as a Xhosa ethnic intellectual, locating with Oyinza and then stopping there. And so you tribalize Biko and deglobalize him and only locate him there as a Bantu scholar, essentially. And so Biko as an existential philosopher, Biko who's thinking with your Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, Fanon, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Foucault. So we what? We deglobalize Biko and we tribalize him as a Xhosa intellectual. And that's the fear, colleagues. And I'm deliberately putting it like that because those, especially those of us who are serious about decolonial work, those are the challenges that we are currently confronting. And the working group that UCT is already making the very same mistakes. Where you start in the global, you make around the comments around the need to combine as global South scholars, recognizing that we are all subaltern, linking our struggles, linking them with the favelas, linking them with the experiences of our brothers and sisters currently with the Trump administration, your Hispanics, your Latinos, linking them with our Indian brothers and sisters, right? So you are able to see the transnational commonality of these struggles. But at the same time, you're calling on us to come back with local philosophical tools that what? Have no philosophical or empirical application to the external. And that's my fear. And those are the struggles that for me are occurring in the field of production. But let's speak more about the recontextualizing field, because that for me is a personal research interest of mine. And especially if you come in the humanities, that's very under-theorized. We always think of curricula, at least in the enacted sense, as very neutral, innocent, and apolitical. And we know that's wrong. That's empirically, philosophically nonsense. It's wrong. And the reason we know that that's wrong is because we have colleagues who you cannot touch Thomas Hobbes. And opposite, in the dialectical relationship, there are colleagues without Fanon, there's no engagement. So before you can speak, read Fanon first. So what does that mean? And for me, that's where the proper theorization needs to be happening. That yes, it is important to look at who we write, who's writing what, the kind of knowledges that are produced. It's very, very important. But in terms of the curriculum design and its construction, what are some of the underlying ideological bases that we are drawing on? Are you drawing on Afrofeminism? Are you drawing on decoloniality? Are you drawing on existentialism? Or even Africana existentialism? And the worst of them all, I'm neutral. Those are those, I'm neutral. That too is a political agenda, right? That too is political. To claim neutrality in what is a contested space is political in and of itself. So that I think needs to be unearthed as well. And I think, finally, the field that I think is largely theorized, it's largely contested, and this is where a significant portion of our students are contesting it, is the field of reproduction, right? The arena of teaching and learning. I'm tired of learning about Fanon, I wish you can teach me this. I'm tired of learning about that dead white man, please teach me this. Those are where the struggles are. And even there I'm arguing, colleagues, that we need to fashion a much more sophisticated and post-tribal understanding of transformation. Beyond just ontologically reducing political subjects to their race. So because I'm white, I cannot have access to reason. So because I'm white, I cannot, so therefore, by virtue of my own ontology, as a black man, then therefore I'm assumed to be progressive. Colleagues, I work at UKZN. 80 of us are black. No, not everyone is progressive. So it's that simplistic dialectical conversation that we are not talking about. where we are reducing ontology with epistemology. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you collapse the two, you are therefore assuming that being, becoming, and knowledge is the same thing. Not only is that weird, but you go further by assuming and imposing that by virtue of your own being in your body, therefore you assume to be progressive. And for me, that's a reductionist understanding of transforming curricula, right? Because then if you're of this body, don't teach that. If you're of this class or this, don't teach that. Whereas we should be fashioning a much more complex understanding of transformation. One that is transformative, and one that is inclusive and socially just, and hopefully democratic. So that different academics with different beings and identities can come into the discourse and contest. So I've mapped out, colleagues, the background and the emergence of the 2015-2016 movement. I've begun to look at the struggles for decolonizing curricula through the epistemic pedagogical arena, starting with the field of production, where new knowledge is happening, including your Africanization, decoloniality, decolonization, Afrocentric, and I'm being told even now we're in the fourth industrial revolution, right? So that's where the new knowledge is currently happening. I've also mapped out in the need for us to critically interrogate and explore the recontextualizing field. What does that even mean, right? The whole identity, discursive gap and everything when it comes to us designing our own curricula. That too needs to be theorized. And then finally, I ended my reflections on perhaps the most contested of all the arenas, and that's your teaching and learning space, where students have been much more forceful. But I think for us to move forward, students not only need to be forceful and critical in the teaching and learning space in the classroom, but they also need access to powerful knowledge. They also need to access the field of production. And they also need to possibly have access to the recontextualizing field. Right? The way you design your curricula. Is it possible to almost counter-hegemonically reimagine what that would look like, where we co-construct our curricula with students? And does that therefore mean we are positioning students as knowers who've got legitimate information beyond my own personal experience and my own background that I'm coming from? What are the implications of designing curricula like that? And so those are some of the possible, at least some of the thoughts that I have when it comes to transforming curricula, looking at it through the epistemic pedagogical device. But what are the solutions, colleagues? Unlike Sally, I'll be brave. Unlike Sally, I'll be brave to put my name on the hat, to begin to throw in a few ideas that I think could begin to help us, right? And one of them is by Latin American scholar Grossfegel with Maldonado Torres, where they begin to write about and theorize around epistemic disobedience, right? Where we not only acknowledge that these key scholars are there and they exist, but is it not possible for us to formulate decolonization of curricula by repositioning these African scholars and thinkers? Because what that does, it does two things. First one, it makes us move beyond the dead white man discourse. Because we are able to say there is no such thing. Knowledge and the production of knowledge has always been transnational, right? Has always been transnational. So it's about silence knowledge, silence voices, and us repositioning that in our curriculum. And that's one of the ways that I've responded to it in my own module, right? And the colleagues during talk, we could know that I teach the philosophy of education at UKZN. It's a third-year module at the School of Education. And one of the things that I started playing around with was the repositioning and organizing of knowledge. I don't have to get rid of Plato. I still need my Aristotle. I still need my Heideggers. I still need them, right? So, but one of the ways that I started playing around with it was that I noticed that for African philosophy of education, your ethno-philosophy, sage philosophy, nationalist liberation philosophy, and professional philosophy was only at the end. So it took me 2 years of struggling, then I put that to be the first thing that we're discussing. Of course, there's resistance. But what I'm saying is that we don't have to purely conceptualize the transformation of curricula through these big transformational everyday moments. They may never come. But let's take advantage of these little moments of the everyday that I think Spivak calls it slow cooking. And I think that's where perhaps the potential for for decoloniality lands, right? These moments of the everyday where the sequencing, pacing, and the reorganizing of knowledge can be transformative. Because by forcing them and setting all my tests in my main exam to be around African philosophy, by the time we get to Plato, they've forgotten about Plato. But they know Mandali, they know Oruka. They know about sage philosophy. Maybe that's a possible, but I look forward to your critique and possibly reflections around how we can improve it. Recently, there's a school of thought building up on Wesley Lefranc, right? Leslie Lefranc from Stellenbosch University, right? Where he proposes Ubuntu curriculum, where he links Ramos's philosophical contributions with Pina, right? The notion of kurere, to run, right? That whole idea of democratic active force of curriculum. Is that what perhaps we should be thinking about? At least at a philosophical level. The pursuit of Ubuntu curriculum, a socially just curriculum. One that is sensitive to the demographic of the kind of students that we have and that are in front of us. Perhaps that's one of them. One solution that I feel quite strongly about, and I'll keep defending this, is to reclaim Moro's classical understanding of epistemological access, particularly from the early 1990s, right? Where he argued, quite rightly I still argue, that in order for us to contest with knowledge, right, in order for us to transform and things like that, we cannot give access to knowledge to our students. It is not ours to give. You do not have it. What you can do is for students and lecturers to co-construct knowledge together in the classroom or in the seminar room, critique it, and therefore. That's where you begin to see access to powerful knowledge. That's where you begin to see students proposing alternative knowledge and everything like that. But we as academics cannot sit down, create all this transformative knowledge, and continue to position students as passive consumers of curriculum and then give it to them to drink. It doesn't work like that. And on the last point, Muslim is oppressing me. On the last point, and I go back to where I started. I think I go back to where I started, right? I really do think, and I'm responding to the UCT working group plans around decolonization and things like that. And I do think we need to be careful, colleagues, in the way we are formulating decolonization of curricula, because I think where the tension is that to a large extent we agree. We need to transform, right? To a large extent, there is consensus. I think the tension where is to balance the knowledges from the global south together with the edge to essentialize what it means to be African. And I will tell you what I mean by that. As recently as 2016, there is a book written by Msila and Gumbo where they speak about Africanizing the curriculum. The very opening introduction is around how Msila was a sick man, he was very sick, he was taken to the village, threw out all his clothes, he ate this plant, and this aunt healed him. Everything Western, everything developmental is bad, and we need to go back to the bushes. So it's almost a very nativist colonial understanding of what it means to be an African. And that's the kind of book that is so complicated because existentially as a black man, when I read that, I don't identify myself. And he claims to be speaking about me. So I think we need to be careful, colleagues, when we speak about this, because it is possible for us to balance this tension, right, of the knowledges and the need to focus on the knowledges of the global south, together with our commitment towards transforming curriculum. And I think I'll end there.